added something to my app. Okay, there you go. Okay, okay, I'm ready. Thanks.
Welcome back, comrades, to Communist University 2025. This session with the distinguished speaker, Lars T. Lee, will be on revolutionary defeatism. Anyone who wants to join in the conversation, to ask a question, click the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. If you don't want to be identified, you're very welcome to put questions in the chat function. So, Lars, over to you, comrade.
Sorry, Lars, I muted you by mistake. You'll have to unmute again. Sorry.
Just need to unmute yourself, comrade.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm going to talk about the revolutionary defeatism, and basically I'm going to talk about what replaced it in 1917, because I'll start off with showing with, I think most of you know, that the defeatism slogan, the word, was dropped at the beginning of 1917 and never came back. So we have to, the sort of central question historically is what replaced it, if anything. Maybe it was just a verbal change, or maybe it was a real policy change, or maybe there was no change, but the defeatism was still not central. So that's what I will first take a look at, the sort of the last appearance of the defeatism slogan. It's instructive. And then I'm going to, I think I will now share, if I can do it. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so you can see now, I hope, the my title of that I came up with, which is Lenin and the Bolsheviks in 1917, Revolutionary Defeatism, or, and here's my my label for what the best description of their actual policy, actual message in 1917, anti-agreement revolutionary defensism, which will need, of course, some unpacking for you to be legible. So, so I'm going to essentially talk about, first show that it was rejected in March, and then talk about what I mean by anti-agreement revolutionary defensism. And then I'm going to the case study, that's always my modus operandi, of a debate that took place before Lenin arrived at the March Soviet Conference, which was a National Soviet Conference in March. And it's been overlooked more or less by historians, but what we find there is a clash between these two kinds of revolutionary defensism, pro-agreement and anti-agreement. And we'll go through the arguments on both sides, and I think we'll come away with a better understanding of what was at stake in 1917. And I will essentially argue that we don't need Lenin we don't need Lenin's return to get the basic issues. Of course, the basic issues also come from Lenin before he came back because of his role as leader of the Bolsheviks, but not because when he came back he needed to rearm the party. Okay, so so now I'm going to move down my little document here so what Lenin wrote a letter from afar. He wrote a series of them, but the only one that got to Russia before he did was the first one, and it was published in Prague with a number of cuts. And I argued in my study of the topic that most of the cuts were cosmetic or adjusting to new developments online, or, well, I had various reasons. But there was one case that where what I called it was the actual case of censorship, and that was when they removed the defeatism slogan. So this is what this passage that I have here was written by Lenin in his letter from afar. He's sitting there in Zurich trying to figure out what's going on, and this was printed. So this is not controversial between Lenin and his fellow Bolsheviks. So the crisis was precipitated by a series of extremely severe defeats sustained by Russia and her allies. This is kind of an obvious fact, but Lenin is trying to roll it into his analysis. The defeats shook up the entire old apparatus of government, the entire old order, roused the anger of all classes against the population, against the government, They embittered the army, wiped out a very good large part of the commanders, composed of backward landowner type people, gentry, and an exceptionally rotten officerdom, and replaced it with a young and buoyant one of predominantly bourgeois, socially mobile, and petty bourgeois origin. So a new officer corps, although he didn't say so here, but not at the top. The top was still the same old guys. So he goes on to call the war the great stage manager who accelerated the development of the revolution. Then he followed that in his draft that he sent them with the following. This sentence is it has that Lenin tang to it. Those who openly groveling to the bourgeoisie or simply lacking backbone howled and wailed against defeatism, quote unquote, which is his slogan that he had been pushing for the last 2 or 3 years, and was a minority one, even within the party, I think, are now faced by the fact of the historical connection between the defeat of the extremely backward and barbarous Tsarist monarchy and the beginning of the revolutionary conflagration. He emphasizes beginning because he, of course, thinks it's going to go on. And I must say that I'm not particularly, I don't think this, my own reaction to this sentence is that it's not very convincing, because the fact that defeat and revolution are connected is, nobody ever denied that, or it's pretty obvious. But is he actually saying that first of all, did the Bolsheviks or have anything to do with that defeat? No, they did not. The defeat was not caused by anything the Bolsheviks did. And secondly, was he actually saying that we should take credit for defeats and the high casualty rates and the economic displacement and all the other horrible things that were going on because of the war and the defeat? And of course, I don't think he is. So I'm not sure exactly. I'm not going to defend that sentence, but for us, the important fact is that it was cut from Pravda. It wasn't in there. And as I say, it's the one time when the people, the editors, mainly Kamenev, I think, sharpened it up in various ways. But this, they really censored a political view that they thought they didn't want to be associated with it, and they didn't want Pravda readers to see this and to see that the leader of the party was going yay for defeatism. So and when Lenin came back, he didn't complain. He didn't switch. He didn't never use the word again. So I have to assume that he agreed. The Pravda editors explained to him why this was unacceptable, and in fact he said, "Okay, I understand now. I've talked to the soldiers and I've talked to my people in Petrograd, and I realized that there's what he called honest defensism." But I'm not going to go into that. I think partly we are aware of this, his changing about honest, quote unquote, honest defensism, sincere defensism. But I'm going to now switch over to describing what I think took its place, or not took its place, but what was the actual policy that the Bolsheviks had. So what was the message? So what I got here. I have a quote here that I like, and it was I learned something from it when I first read it. Lenin on the centrality of the agreement issue. And this other struck me. And he's looking back in spring 1918 at debates within the Bolshevik Party, and what the point that he made that struck me was when he said that my critics, he said, people like Kamenev and Zinoviev, what was their mistake? They overlooked the main thing. It was an empirical, really. It was a difficult to read situation, and they made a mistake on it. That's what his analysis was. But the main thing, he says, was that the Soviets had come over from agreementizing to us. So in Lenin's view, the rejection of agreementizing, quote unquote, is equivalent to support for Soviet power. So that brought out to me the absolute centrality of the agreement issue. And agreement, the Russian word for agreement is soglashenia, which is an ordinary, perfectly ordinary word that you always translated agreement, except in this political context when sometimes it's unfortunately translated as compromise or conciliation or something like that. I think those are very misleading translations, so I stick to agreement. But and I had this, the Bolsheviks had a very negative, abusive in the sense that it's used in trying to give a bad description of it. It's not only just agreement, but agreementizing. That's my translation of a key word in the vocabulary of the Bolsheviks and everybody else in 1917. Soglashatelstvo. It's a nice round Russian word that you can roll around on your lips. But so what to explain why it was central, I'll go back to something we all have often read, that the Bolsheviks won in 1917 because they advocated the land, peace, and bread. Well, they did, and I think that's a first step for a real understanding. But what might be confusing is to think that they were the ones who thought that land, peace, and bread were good goals, that everybody else was for, slavery and continual war and poverty and no, everybody wanted land, peace, and bread, but they had two ways of getting into it, two paths. It might be called in that metaphor. The path was used. One through agreement with the bourgeois or educated or elite society, with the provisional government and the class forces behind it. And the main spokesman of this path of agreement was a man named Irakli Tsereteli, but Bolshevik leader. And we'll be seeing him a fair amount when I get to the debates in March. And so he said we can achieve the basic aims via an agreement. These people will work with us, not against us, and we will, since they're on our side, we can get to our goals, not only with the war, but all revolutionary goals. And we'll do it with not so much fighting and bloodshed and so forth. And essentially, Lenin and the Bolsheviks all said at all times, no, the agreement strategy, tactic, path of agreement will just not work because the class interests are too destabilizing. They won't work with you. So the way to think about this, I think, is that both sides had a common aims. Let me see if I got that. And unfortunately, I don't have a thing for so I'm just going to tell you. But the common aims are on the war issue: a rapid but democratic peace. That's one. That is a rapid peace, but still one that rejects any territorial aggrandizement, no annexations, no indemnities, no anti-imperialist. Both sides were for that. Both sides understood that it was an imperialist war under the Tsar, but how to get away from that is the question. And then the other side of it was, in the meantime, support for the troops and a defensive posture that will prevent the Germans and the Austrians who were there on Russian territory from going any further. Okay, so I'm going to outline now the actual policy of the path of agreement on the war issue, as advocated by the Bolshevik leader and the Socialist Revolutionary majority, also about how to get to achieve these goals that everybody accepted. So this is now the path of agreement that I'm now going to outline. First, we'll change the aims of the war. From territorial aggrandizement to the democratic, anti-annexationist, anti-imperialist. We'll change the aims of the war via an agreement with first the provisional government. And as you will see, they thought it was a great success of the Russian Revolution already in March that the provisional government had quote unquote agreed to change in war aims, and then we'll get the Allies on board. We will have conferences, and we'll persuade them to change their aim. And we've already convinced the provisional government. Secondly, we will convene a socialist conference of all the socialists from all the countries, including Germany and Austria, and this will create a national sort of pressure for peace. A military offensive cannot be ruled out because that's part of active defense. So when they said revolutionary defensism, they meant defense could include a military offensive as part of quote unquote active defense. It's an offensive. Yes, we're moving forward. The troops are moving forward, attacking, but it's for defensive reasons. And then finally, until both sides, Germany and France and everybody, agree to change the war aims and to achieve peace, a democratic peace, full mobilization of the country. Okay, so that's the pro-agreement revolutionary defense. Now, on the other side is what I call anti-agreement revolutionary defensism, and I call it revolutionary defensism because it accepts, one, that you will support the troops, and two, a defense where, hey, now the defensive posture, that's good, let's keep it. But other than that, they first said you can't really change the war aims through an agreement with the other side. The class interests are too apart from each other. And secondly, since you can't achieve war aims via an agreement, the only way to get our war aims, the other flip side of the agreement tactic, is Soviet power. That is to say, a clash of interests, a revolutionary blast that excludes any influence from the bourgeois or educated or elite census society, whatever term you want to use. It excludes those people entirely and rests the blast entirely politically on the revolutionary classes, on the Narod, on the people, the workers and the peasants and the lower middle class in the cities. In other words, all prior to the Soviets. So and finally, in the meantime, so you have reject the agreement, which means ipso facto, as Lenin said, you want if you reject agreementizing, you go over to Soviet power. In the meantime, however, before this has happened, before there is a revolutionary government that will achieve these aims, in the meantime, maintain a defensive posture at the front, so no to any military offensive, and support our comrades in the trenches who are sitting there without boots, without food, without equipment. Okay, so now I'm switching over to where the March Soviet Conference in March 1917, a very important episode overlooked more or less by historians, and certainly, so what is it? It took place in Petrograd from March, March 29th to April 3rd. Lenin shows up just as it's over. So it is on the eve of Lenin's return, and it shows the state of play at this time. And here's my claim about it, that the central fault lines that define revolutionary politics throughout 1917 was already clearly defined here. Oh, I see. Defined twice. Okay. And so it's funny how, because this fact, the fact does not fit the reigning narratives, it just sort of scrubbed out of the picture. And what it is that there was a huge debate at the Congress between two resolutions on the war. One side was led by, one side was led by Kamenev, that was the anti-agreement side, and the other side was led by Tsereteli, who was at this time one of the most important leaders in the revolutionary Russia at the time, because he had a majority of the Soviet behind him, and each side put in a resolution, Each side, there was a vote. The Bolshevik resolution was supported not only by the Bolsheviks, but by anti-agreement factions in the other parties, the left SR, left Socialist Revolutionaries, who were not yet a separate party. They were only a small group within the Socialist Revolutionary Party, and certain Menshevik, so-called Menshevik internationalists. So there were the resolution supported by the Bolsheviks and the people lost big. It was only about a fifth of the votes, and the majority resolution was adopted. And furthermore, the Bolsheviks spokesman tried to introduce amendments to the majority resolutions, which were turned down. But the reason these resolutions are important and revealing is that there was a campaign theme. There were already mass agitation campaigns that had already been launched. It just started, of course, but they had already been launched in March on these two themes, which were an open offer of peace negotiations and publish the secret treaties. So we'll look now. We're going to, I think, get into the weeds here and look at this debate, because I think the spokesmen on both sides are very clear about what the issues are and what the rationale is. So first, we have Tsereteli, who is the pro-agreement, on revolutionary defensism, the path of agreement in foreign policy. And what I like about this quotation is that he says, he first starts off with his summary and an analysis of what the other side was saying. So, the standard narrative is that Kamenev and Tsereteli were practically on the same page, that they were buddies, that they both wanted conditional support of the provisional government. But here's how Tsereteli himself summarized the Bolshevik position, and it shows that there was a clear, very strong demarcation line between the two. Okay, we are told by Kamenev and other Bolshevik speakers that although our provisional government has proclaimed a rejection of annexations and indemnities, and Tsereteli was very proud of this fact, and our provisional government may perhaps enter into negotiations with the Allies for purposes of working out a general agreement. That's again the strategy of the pro-agreement defensists. Nevertheless, when the moment has not yet arrived when the Allies in united fashion can propose such a platform of peace, nor has Germany given a reply to it. And then they say, the Bolsheviks, until this time arrives, not only Russia, but also the Allies accept these conditions, we cannot, this is the key sentence, we cannot regard the war that Russia is now waging as the business, Gela, of democracy, or as the business of revolutionary Russia. So the Bolsheviks were already saying, and the other side was hearing them say this, that we cannot regard the war that Russia is now waging as the business of revolutionary democracy. That means the Soviet constituency, or the business of revolutionary Russia. But we, the pro-agreement people, consider it necessary that the provisional government begin negotiations with the Allied governments, so that a general platform based on these principles can be worked out for all the Allies, not only Russia, but the whole Entente. And I have the Entente in Russia, in Russian is Соглашение, which is agreement. So the Entente, even the name of the Allies was officially the agreement, will reject any intention of annexations or indemnities. But comrades, since our government, the sort of but is very important here, but since our government has made a decisive step along this path, its further steps in the same direction are inevitable. And if the democracy, the Soviet constituency, defends these ideals with the same energy that has shown up to now, I do not doubt, comrades, that in the future we will be able to announce the success of the democracy in achieving these aims. So you can see what he's arguing. He's telling the crowd, these are people from all over Russia, from Soviets all over Russia, and he's telling them, listen, we've already had some chalked up some successes in changing the war aims, and we'll continue to go because of our influence and because there are people on the other side who are willing to be partners with us. But then the other side of it is, until its aspirations are realized, not only in Russia but in other countries, until you get this agreement, it considers it a debt of honor, and you would certainly not find any word like debt of honor in anything any Bolshevik would say, to stand in the defense of the country, and it views the present war in the light of the conditions on which it is being waged, which is under the leadership or ascendancy of Russian democracy. We're more or less in charge now with the Soviets as the business of Russian democracy. Okay, I think it's pretty clear that what he was, and it's not. It looks pretty made look pretty. It didn't, it failed that policy, but it certainly, if it had worked, it would have been peace would have been achieved in a happier way. And then here's another one that they were very proud of the fact that the government made a declaration of 27 March on the 27th, that is during the conference, that said we support the aims of anti-extinction. Now, of course, it was hypocritical on the part of the provisional government, but Tsereteli was very proud of the fact that they got this to happen. So he says, I was a member of the delegation. I said to the government that it must make consistent step, must make a rupture with the imperialist tendencies that dominated under the old system. So you see that Tsereteli is certainly not denying that it was an imperialist war, and that we needed a change in war aims to make it anything acceptable. So the rupture between the new Russia and the old system of administration inside the country has been realized. All Russia now stands under the Republic of the Democratic Republic and other revolutionary aims. The provisional government, taking into account the common voice of the Russian democracy, solemnly pronounced its rupture of the foreign policy with the Tsarist government. We, the provisional government, says we no longer have those bad aims that the provisional government did. The policy of the imperial circles before the overturn. So there are imperial circles in the bourgeoisie. They're now being repudiated. So in our resolution that we were providing for you to vote for, which did get majority support, we renounced encroachments on the territory of others, and this rupture with the imperialist ambitions of the old government has been announced by the new provisional government. And so this goes on he goes on to say, the provisional government alone among the governments has done it, but we're going to get the other people too. It's a tremendous victory of the democracy. You, comrades, should be proud of yourself. Remember, the democracy means the people. It doesn't mean majority rule exactly. It means a group of people, namely the soldiers and peasants who were sitting in the hall. This proclamation by the provisional government is a tremendous victory of the whole democracy. Okay, so now we're going to get Kamenev, and of course, the standard story is that he was a critical supporter of the war and wanted to was a revolutionary defensivist himself. In that article I wrote last summer I had went into this in length. I'm not going to particularly argue it out now. I'm just going to quote what Kamenev said at the March conference as the spokesman of the anti-agreement revolutionary defensivist. And in this, he got rather rebel rousing in some of this stuff. So, in this grave moment, do not allow illusions to possess us. Only one thing is demanded of you, the same we should demand of ourselves: the truth. Too many high-sounding words have covered up the robber policies that have triumphed and led to war. Not high-sounding words, not a cover-up for the imperialist war, but the truth. The naked truth about what kind of war this is. This is what the narodi, okay, I kept narod, it means people, and he said that's the plural, so that's what the peoples demand. We alone, the victorious revolution, can say this truth, and we must say it. What is the truth? We must say this is not a narodny war. This war was not dreamed up by the narodi, the people, but the imperialist classes of all countries have doomed us to this war. So he's saying that the war that you're fighting right now is thoroughly illegitimate. That's not someone who's giving critical support to the war. So that's anti. So what's the way of achieving to make it a non-imperialist? there is, comrades, one situation when we will say that this war, not started by us, but fought over markets and colonies, has indeed become ours, when we will not only support our brothers dying in the trenches, but when we will say, let us create a revolutionary army, let us arm the whole world, let us declare revolutionary. And that situation is when the toiling classes of the Soviets conquer the Vlasts by themselves, when these classes will defend in a revolutionary struggle the principles of a system in which there will be neither war nor classes, i.e. socialism. Our war, the one we will conduct, will be fought to create this system. Pretty clear and pretty damning of the discourse that I have to bring it out and as if no one knew it. So one reason I like to give these talks is that when I go over these quotations, I learn something. And so I italicized one phrase here, which I did not really take in the significance until I prepared this talk, which is when we not only support our brothers dying in the trenches. So what he's saying there is, right now we will support our brothers dying in the trenches. We'll get equipment to them. We'll get clothing to them. We won't abandon them. And furthermore, we will not tell them to disobey orders or anything like that. But when we go another step further and actually support the war in a genuine way. So that leads us to the clash between two ways of supporting the army, two ways of saying we're not going to disorganize the army or sabotage it. So I have here, remain at their posts. That's what Kamenev said in a notorious editorial in the middle of the month, versus, and I'm quoting the resolution, mobilize all the vital forces of the country. Okay, so here is, I said the Bolsheviks had introduced a resolution on the war that was rejected by the conference. And so I'm going to read from it. First, he says what I've just said had Kamenev say, only the complete liquidation of the entire foreign policy of Tsarism and imperialist bourgeoisie, together with the liquidation of the international secret treaties, we'll get on to the secret treaties in a bit, and a genuine transfer of the Vlast into the hands of the proletariat and the revolutionary democracy, the peasants only, would herald a genuine change in the imperialist character of the war as far as Russia is concerned. And by the same token, if we did have this change in the Vlast and we called for peace, then, and people rejected it, then the war would be justified in alliance with the proletariat of Western Europe. But here's the key. It says, up until that moment, since we rejected this organization of the army and considered that preserving its might is necessary as a barrier against counter-revolution, and Germany, they don't say that, we will call on all soldiers and workers to remain at their posts and to maintain strict organization, i.e. obey orders. Okay, so is this anti-defeatism? Is this some capitulation or compromise by Kamenev and the Bolsheviks in March? Well, I'm now going to give the opinion of what Tsariteli himself said about this. He rejected what the Bolsheviks said very strongly. Tsariteli criticizes the Bolshevik trap. Okay, it says, in the Bolshevik, again, I sort of learned how radical the Bolsheviks are by listening to Tsariteli and seeing him reject it. In the Bolshevik resolution, it says we must not disorganize the army, and those who call for disorganization should be viewed as people outside our own circle. This is a completely justified thought, but comrades, this is a very important statement. We all heard here the soldier who said, if you say to us that we must defend the fatherland, we will defend it. But if you say that the time has come when this is already not defense, but a striving for conquest, we're not going to fight. So you heard just a little while ago Kamenev saying this is an imperialist war and the changing government did not change it. And Tsariteli points out quite correctly that if you go around saying that, you're undermining the war effort by that very fact. So we say, the pro-agreement people, that we are a force with responsibility, and namely, our policy is the policy of the government, and so we can't find ourselves in negative formula and pronouncements about how we are not disorganizing the army. So that's, I think, pretty good. It's a negative formula that we're not disorganizing. No, says Taylor. As long as we view our democracy as a force that determines the positions inside and outside the country, we must not limit ourselves to negative formula, but say straight out, we're calling for the defense of the country because this means the defense of the democracy, defense of the revolution. Applause from the audience. Comrades, if our conference does not place itself on this path of agreement, it shows that it does not understand how important we are. What we say goes, and the government is committed to carrying out our program in agreement with us. So that thought is reflected in the resolution that was passed by the conference. And no, I just want to bring out how strong the language is as compared to, we read the language from the Bolshevik one where it says, almost in a footnote, yeah, we're not going to call for disobeyment of orders. The Conference of the Soviets of Workers and Social Deputies calls on the democracy of the peasants and workers to mobilize all the vital forces of the country and all the spheres of life of the Narod and to reinforce the front to the rear. This is an imperative demand dictated by the present moment in the life of Russia. It is essential to the success of the Great Revolution. The Conference of the Soviets calls all the workers in the factories, in the mills, in the railroads, in the mines, in the postal and telegraphic service, and other enterprises working for the army in the rear to perform their work with the greatest intensity. Goes on and on like this. They maintain the highest energy of its labor, raise labor productivity to its highest point in the interests of providing the army with everything necessary. So very strong, goes on and on about it. So this is, at the very least, there's a very huge difference in emphasis. And now just for, I want to, okay, so that I now have could sort of looked at the debate at the March conference before Lenin shows up. So did anything basically change with Lenin on the points that we have raised? Well, I won't go into it. I don't think so, but I won't go into it except to look here at the resolution passed by the war at the Seventh Party Conference in April, and all these resolutions passed by this is now Lenin's in charge, and he wrote most of the resolutions. I'm pretty sure he wrote this one, and I'm not going to go into the resolutions as a whole. I just wanted to go to the ones that are relevant to what we've been talking about. First, the war cannot be ended by a refusal of the soldiers on one side only to continue the war by simple cessation of hostilities by one of the belligerents. So that's what I call the stick in the mud argument. The stick is the German word for bayonet. And it was a slogan. Lenin said he heard it from a soldier that we can't take our rifle, stick it in the mud, bayonet down, and head off for the villages. We have to fight the war until we have a peace treaty. So this resolution is essentially saying is we obey orders and we don't sabotage and we don't we support the war until the war effort until peace comes. And then this next one is the conference goes. This next one. Okay, the conference reiterates its protest against the base slander spread by the capitalists that we are in favor of a separate peace. We consider the German capitalists to be as predatory as the Russian, British, or other capitalists. And Emperor Wilhelm is as bad a crown brigand as Nicholas II, or the British, Italian, and Romanian, and all other monarchs. So the point of this, I think, why is this here in the resolution, is because he has to say, well, whatever we meant by defeatism, it wasn't that we were favoring Germany. We dislike Germany as much as everybody else. And of course, they say they're against this separate peace, and I'm sure they were against the separate peace, but they were adopting a policy that led inevitably to a separate peace. Okay, what do we got here? Okay, so before I go on to the next part, I want to another very important fact that's been overlooked about March and the Bolsheviks, which is the two agitation campaigns that continued throughout the year were launched in March. And they were already in full swing at the time of this conference. And as we'll see, the Bolsheviks introduced resolutions, introduced amendments to the majority resolution that they knew they weren't going to be accepted, but it was already part of their campaign to identify the Bolsheviks with these themes. And Kamenev and Stalin were the top leaders who decided on these themes and who launched these campaigns. I mean, the whole party was doing it, but it was their leadership who did it. Okay, so the first theme is that we will insist that the government make a general peace offer for peace negotiations with all, immediate peace negotiations with everybody right now. We'll make that offer to Germany and to the Allies both. And that was one. That when they said we will insist that the government do it, of course they knew that the provisional government would never do it, and they were perfectly aware of the fact that we say we're putting pressure on them, we say we demand this, but we don't expect them to do it. We know who these people are. You know, they were imperialists. So what they're really saying when we say we insist that the provisional government open peace negotiations is, if you want peace negotiations, get Soviet power. And along with that is another theme, which was published in secret treaties. This was a very good campaign theme, because it says, listen, we're fighting the war by treaties that were signed by the Tsarist government. You don't even know what's in them. So what are our war aims? So publish these damn treaties and find out. And of course, it would be very embarrassing if they did publish them, because there were all sorts of imperialist and annexationist aims in those treaties. So, these two themes were launched by the Bolsheviks, and believe me, if you are a supporter of the war, critical or otherwise, you would not go around with these two themes, which delegitimized the war and the government strongly. And furthermore, these two themes were continued throughout the year, and the very first thing, excuse me, the very first thing the Second Congress did when it met in October was to pass decrees that carried out these things. Okay, so I want the Tseretel's response to Bolshevik campaign thing. So first, Skripnik is the name of one of the Bolshevik spokesmen, and he proposed the following resolution, which, as I said, follows out this campaign theme that was mentioned. The conference resolution should demand that the provisional government, as a follow-up step to the other things it said, proclaim openly before the whole world of the readiness of the Narodi, the peoples of liberated Russia, to enter into peace negotiations on the basis of the right of nations to self-determination. This was sort of the basic slogan that everybody accepted. So this may not sound subversive or radical, but it was under the circumstances. And so Tsereteli rejected it. The appeal, our resolution, says that the executive committee, the leadership of the Soviet, came to an agreement, there's the key word, with the provisional government about proclaiming a rejection of annexation. And the provisional government did. We saw this before, that they were very proud that the provisional government, in words anyway, wanted to rejected annexation. But the comrade, the Bolshevik spokesman, Skripnik, wants Russia to immediately proclaim its readiness to begin peace negotiations with Germany, bypassing the Allies. Because it's not exactly what he said, but it's close to the practical effect. If we enter into peace negotiations with Germany without involving the Allies, which is what happened eventually, then we voluntarily give over this mighty weapon of getting agreement, getting official agreement, and move toward actions that promise nothing but shame to revolutionary Russia and the international. So, there was a demarcation line, and the Bolsheviks were already making their agitation campaign, saying we should have open and peace negotiations, and this was rejected by the pro-agreement people. Similarly with the pro-secret treaties. So there had already been articles in Pravda, and there had been resolutions produced at meetings on this campaign. We must publish the secret treaties. And so Nogin, who was one of the Bolsheviks, explains why this is a good theme. And he says, comrades, in the government proclamation, the government says it rejects annexations and indemnities. It is said that, however, still that the government has to reckon with the treaties which are concluded under Tsarism with the so-called allies. And I have sick there to say because of the so-called, because one of the differences is that the pro-agreement people really regarded France and England as allies, whereas the Bolsheviks, the anti-agreement people, did not. Comrades, we should know what these treaties are. Should we know what these treaties are? We should. Who concluded them? Those who oppressed us. We know these people of old. You mean that even though we hate these people, the Tsarist government, we should not demand that these treaties be immediately published? Good agitational speech. But Tsariteli says, I consider this amendment to be totally unacceptable, and the comrade who's the author of this amendment knew what it in fact really signifies. If this Bolshevik really understood what he was saying, he himself would reject it. The amendment states that we should publish our treaties. Comrades, we were working toward this, changing the aims, revising the treaties, but by a more reliable path, the path of agreement. We are saying, let the provisional government propose norms for treaties, and let it bring this proposal to the attention not only of the Russian democracy, but of the Narod of allied countries. Okay, so I wanted to make that the two essential campaigns that continued throughout the year and climax of the Second Congress already in effect and already showing a big demarcation line between the Bolsheviks and other anti-agreement people and the majority under Tsariteli. Okay, I just don't want to throw this quote in too because it's a good quote. But so Kamenev also in his speeches makes the point that the counter-revolution has already started. So Kamenev is not saying these people are nice people. We should try to make a deal with them. No, he's saying there are forces that are already want to smother the revolution in Russia are and put limits on it, are organizing themselves already. The Bolsheviks, other Bolshevik people were always saying this. Under various banners, there are forces in Russia that are much offended by the freedom by the Narod. These forces are already in secret preparing resistance to the Soviet of workers. So this is another point where the demarcation line between agreement and anti-agreement and pro-agreement. The anti-agreement people saying not only we can't work with these people, but they're going to try to smother us, right? Which is again was accurate. What have I got there? Okay, so what I want to say now is I want to take a look. Sometimes when we looking back, think about this, we say here was the worker, here were the soldiers. They believed such and such. They were honest defensists. So we fashioned a message, and that was the appropriate message, and we convinced them. But that's not. That makes the soldiers too much of a passive recipients of just a well-crafted message. To understand what's really happening, you have to understand their outlook, and there was a mutual interaction. So I have a little thing here on the soldier outlook in 1917. It's just a brief outline. I just want to get some points across. They were not just passive recipients of a message. They did not support stick in the mud. They put the bayonets in. No, they realized the army had to stay in the field, and that the soldiers were against anyone who called for disorganizing, sabotaging, not helping our comrades in the troops. They did not need any persuading that the war was fought for imperialist aims. So it isn't like you have to convince them it's imperialist. They knew that. They just wanted a path out of the situation. And they already wanted a rapid peace rather than victory to the end, which is the bourgeois educated society program. The workers strongly believed that they, and along with the workers, but the soldiers mainly, thought they had made the revolution. They had put the government in place. They overthrew the Tsar, and the government should therefore carry out their basic program. And this is very key. The pro-agreement leaders, they're telling others, encourage them in this belief. This is very striking. The Tsariteli is very strong, saying you're in charge. you made the revolution, you get to have your program carried out, and if the provisional government is under an obligation to do so. There was also a deep split in the army between officers and the peasant soldiers. There was also a vast process of democratization going on. Committees, political agitation, and so forth. Both these processes had direct effects on the fighting ability of the army. Long, big topic, of course. They expected full support from the home front, and in the opening weeks of the revolution, at least, they were somewhat suspicious of the workers. Were the workers going to help them or not? So one of the things that the Bolsheviks and the worker parties had to do very much was say, no, we will support the workers, and certainly we're going to work hard and get you the equipment and the clothing and the ammunition you need. Okay, I'm skipping that. So I see that I'm getting rather old, so I'm getting fast here, so I'm going to go rather rapidly through some other quotes, which I think I'm really here for food for thought on all these things by well-known Bolsheviks and revolutionary social democrats. They were Bukharin. So Bukharin had something to say about the breakdown and reconstitution of the army. And so I'm quoting this from an article. This whole thing is taken from an article from my new book. Here's a plug for it. It's called "What Was Bolshevism?" Has this article and other articles on this topic. So here's how Bukharin argued about it. It can only his argument can already be found in a program communist, the program of the communists, which is available online in Marxism, the archive, and very much worth reading. Published in the summer of 1918. He's rebutting the accusation made by the moderate socialists that the Bolsheviks destroyed the army. So he agrees with his accusers that the breakdown of such an essential institution is a bad thing, but it was inevitable, and the Bolsheviks were the only ones who showed a path to getting the army back into shape again. The Tsarist army operated on a place of a class hierarchy that reflected the outside society, officer groups from the educated society, and soldiers from the Narod, especially the peasants, of course. And if this class hierarchy was disturbed, the army was disturbed. It couldn't operate. And that's exactly what happened. And it was happening even before February 1917. So now I'm going to quote Bukharin. It is evident with the revolution, the army, entirely resting on the old Tsarist basis, the army driven to slaughter for the purpose of conquering Constantinople, even by Kerensky, who was supposed to be leader of the people, must inevitably have become disorganized. I mean, it was disorganized because the class aims were antithetical to what the soldiers wanted. You ask why? The bolers saw they were being organized, trained, and thrown into battle for the sake of the criminal stupidity of the bourgeoisie. They saw that for nearly 3 years they sat in the pensions, perished, hungered, suffered, died, killed others, all for the sake of someone's money bags. It's natural enough that when the revolution had displaced the old discipline and a new one had not yet time to be formed, the collapse, ruin, and death of the old army took place. This disease was inevitable. Of course, the Bolsheviks were helping the soldiers see this, but nevertheless, it was inevitable. The soldiers rising against the Tsar in February was already the result of the disorganization of the Tsarist army. And here comes a very, very eloquent statement by Bukharin. Every revolution destroys what is old and rotten. A certain period, a very difficult one to live through, must pass until the new life is formed, until the building of a beautiful new edifice is begun on the ruins of the old pigsty. So he's talking, and he is writing in the midst of this certain period, transition period. So his challenge to his accusers: if you want revolution, you must be prepared to pay the price. And if you want an effective Russian army, don't try to prop it up as in 1917, but get a new government in there, based on a new revolutionary blast and a new class hierarchy, which will get the army back together again. So then he talks about in the book in 1920, he talks about I should mention the name of the book, Economy of the Transition Period. Should be better known, or at least the argument should be better known. He says, basically, it's saying here, democratization of the army didn't work and couldn't work to get an effective army. In the place of the strict imperialist subordination, was put forward a broad application of the elective principle. That is true. That happened in 1917. Innumerable committees were created at every link in the army chain. Army issues became the subject of very wide deliberation and discussion. The old class in the army was decisively discredited and fell apart. New organs, and through them new classes, became the real nodes, whatever that means, of the Vlast in the army. What's the objective meaning of this process? Disintegration and destruction of the old imperialist army and training and preparation of the active organizing forces of the new proletarian army. A training or education purchased at the cost of the destruction of the old. No one will affirm that these regimental committees made the army battle ready. But you see, the objective task was not to support the battle ready of the old army. It was to destroy it and prepare the forces for another chain of command. Let's go a long chain, I'm skipping this quote. Okay. I have almost talked for an hour now. Why don't I just glance at I have two more quotes that I want to show you. I'm going to glance at them just because for food for thought. One was about Zinoviev, by Zinoviev in 1916. And I think it's, so when the point he's making here, this is that there's one of their slogans, which is civil war, turn the imperialist war into a civil war. He makes it very clear that in his opinion, this was not new. This was not some new radical thing, but was endorsed that. He says this slogan, transformation, became the subject of various attacks from the social chauvinist Edward David, ending with the leftist Russian Kautskyist L. Trotsky. So what did we mean when we announced this slogan? We said their obligation to carry out what was already undertaken, obligations they'd already taken at Stuttgart and Basel. These were international socialist congresses. We meant to say that, quote, what had been acknowledged hundreds of times by all the leaders of the Second International preceding the war, to wit, that the objective conditions of our era established connection between war and revolution. Nothing more. And on the view of the Civil War, the view of our party is essentially the same as it was in 1907 when the Stuttgart Resolution was passed with women's active participation. Okay, and then since we've been talking about the distinction, the connection between war and revolution, I thought we'd go back to what I think is a very, essentially, I think it's a good discussion that I want to bring up. It's not maybe directly relevant to what I've been saying. This is Karl Kautsky in his book 1902 on War and Revolution. So basically, he's saying what he's saying in this passage that I'm having is there is a connection between war and revolution. It's probably going to happen because we're entering into an era of war and revolution. But you know, it isn't great. It isn't great. It's not the best way to do things. But of course, we don't get a choice in this matter. So no one misunderstand me. I'm not prophesying. I'm not expressing my wishes, but I'm do not declare what will happen, and I'm certainly not saying what I think should happen. When I speak of war as a means of revolution, it doesn't mean I desire war. It's horrors are so terrible that today it is only military fanatics whose ghastly courage could lead them to demand a war in cold blood. So, right. You know, we have to think about that, whether what's the connection in our own minds between thinking war leads to revolution and do we want a war? And he says it's even when revolution is an end in itself, which even at the most bloody price cannot be too dearly purchased, which is something how it sums up what Bukharin is saying. You cannot desire war as a means to release revolution, for it's the most irrational means to this end. Now, here's what I think is very prophetic. It brings such terrible destruction and creates such gigantic demands upon the state that any revolution springing from it is heavily loaded with tasks that are not essential to it, but which momentarily absorb all its means and energy. But that's what happened with the Bolsheviks. Consequently, a revolution which rises from a war is a sign of the weakness of the revolutionary class, and often the cause of further weakness just because of the sacrifice that brings with it as well as the moral and intellectual degradation to which the war gives rise. And again, if you look at the Civil War from 1918 to 1921, this sentence resonates. It increases enormously the tasks of the revolutionary regime and simultaneously weakens its powers. Accordingly, a revolution springing from a war is easier wrecked or sooner loses its moral force. So we do not have the slightest ground to wish for an artificial acceleration of our revolutionary advance by war. But things don't move according to our wishes. To be sure, men make their own history, but do not choose according to their desires the problems which they have to solve, nor the conditions which the problems are to be solved. If it came according to our wishes, who would not prefer the peaceful to the violent road, which is what the pro-agreement people were promising? And our present strength, the violent road for which our present strength is perhaps not sufficiently grown, which perhaps would swallow us up. But it's not our task to have higher suspicions about the world, but to recognize them and to try to do the best we can, basically. I have arrived at the conviction that we are entering upon a revolutionary epoch. This is 1902, he's writing this. The greatest and most difficult of battles for political power still lies before us. It will be decided only after a long, hard struggle that will test our powers to the utmost. In 1917 or late 1916, because of writing State and Revolution, Lenin had occasion to go over this book. And he could, 1902, The Social Revolution. And he criticized it because of what it did not say about the state. But you can tell from his remarks that he was very pleased with this book as a whole. He sort of reminded him of how much he liked Kautsky, and quoted it several times in arguments with his fellow authors. So I just threw that in because I think that it's just a remarkable statement that gives food for thought. And so there are many, many more things to say about defeatism, both in 1917 and elsewhere. I tried to bring out important basic facts that have been overlooked, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lars. That's excellent, and also very much wonderful scholarship. And I look forward to reading your new book very much indeed. So, comrades, over to the floor. Click raise hand at the bottom of the screen if you want to make a contribution. You'll be made into a panelist. Don't be shy. It costs nothing. Who would first like to contribute?